closed the doors. So welcome to building a Jawa in about an hour a day. And this is session number 3. So in sessions 1 and 2, we talked about, in session 1 we talked about the costume reference library, the requirements, the standards that the 501st Legion and the Rebel Legion use for judging Jawa costumes for approvability and inclusion into the club. And that is available out on 501st.com or rebellegion.com in the costume reference library portion of the 501st.com. And you can just search Jawa on the Rebel Legion one, and it'll take you right there as well. In fact, if you search Jawa costume, there's a pretty good chance those CRs will come up. And that basically that outlines the requirements, what has to be there, what does it have to look like on the person. Because that's the key, is the approvability is how the costume looks on you. There's no such thing as buying an approved costume already, because if it was approved on somebody else, that person's not you unless you have an identical twin. And even then, you've still got to approve. So you've got to submit it. It's got to be seen on you by the judge through a series of pictures that show all of the angles, and so on and so forth. So that was essentially day number 1. I'm talking about how to kind of measure for various things like sleeve length, and like for the length of the actual robe itself and the size of the head hole in the robe. But it's a simple kind of T-shaped robe. So the only real seams are up the sides and down underneath the bottom of the sleeves. The sleeves end at the wrists. The robe ends slightly above the floor, as you can kind of see some of the boot. And the boots are wrapped with strips, things like that. So that was what we talked about on the first session. In the second session, we actually cut out the shape of the robe and attempted to do some sewing. I will admit, and this gentleman here knows exactly the struggle I had. If you weren't here, you're welcome. Going through to try and illustrate where the stitches go. They're not tough stitches, so I was able to hopefully pantomime my way through feeding them the fabric at least to the machine and saying, and here's what you'd go from here. It's a straight stitch, usually zigzag down the edge of the seams, so it's fairly straightforward in that regard. In fact, we'll have a little teachable moment here just before we get started. In the interest of full disclosure, I was actually able to get the sewing machine fixed, I believe, overnight, and do some of the stitches that I didn't get to do in yesterday's panel. So we actually have the finished robe portion sewn, and this is, obviously would fit a fairly slender person, a very tall person, honestly. The teaching moment is the head hole. Far it'll fit me, and I am not this slender, but thank you for noticing. I was a little overzealous on the cutting out of that part. There are 2 things about this that I think I want to point out. First of all, as was pointed out by one of the other viewers yesterday, you can always cut away more. You can't put it back. So if you're at all nervous about it, start small and then rework as you need to go. Secondly, this fabric is actually fairly stretchy, honestly. It wants to kind of move in different directions. So you have a little give in the neck. So if you're an inch or so within it, and you could pull it over your head, and it would be just fine. Because again, the way the course weave is set, it wants to move in various directions, and so you could massage it even if you made a smaller neck hole. Now, in this case, and like I said yesterday, when we talk about the hood today, the hood fits loosely. It doesn't fit this loosely, but it will kind of cover that part of the body that's not covered by the robe. So just wanted to kind of put that out in the universe, let you all know that the hits didn't stop coming, and so we had a little adversity on that, but we're going to soldier on anyway. So today we're basically just going to be working with the hood, and the things about the hood that are important to kind of understand and know are the shape, how the ties are done, and how it goes together. So it's a self-contained hood. It fits over your head, sits on top of your shoulders. The ties wrap around your neck, and they get tied loosely and then fall down the back. It is not attached to the robe in any way. So it is in a completely separate piece. So the key parts there are the fact that it will be lined with a black cloth. inside, and we will use wire, which is this is the style wire I use, to put into the front hem of the opening to help it keep its shape. Otherwise, it would kind of fall down over here and end up with more of a Sith look than a Jawa look. The Jawas, you always see the hood is always nice and open and round, whereas almost every Jedi or Sith you see, there's the flap of fabric in front of their eyes, very mysterious, spooky looking. So that's where we're going to go today. There are patterns online, and I think I might have a very bad JPEG of one of them. Assuming I can get my computer to work. Actually, let's do it this way. Maybe 627, that sounds like when I might have been looking it up. Yeah, so let's see if we can zoom that up as much as possible. Where is the... I don't want to edit in Designer Online. Just show me the super picture.
I think it's the Scum. I think it's just to the right of that is the one more and one more. Yep. Right?
That one?
Yep. Yeah.
There we go.
I think we're at a better angle to see it.
Possibly. So, and I said it's not a very good picture, and it came to me this way. I didn't make it any worse, I promise. But the black fabric we're talking about is just a rectangle, 38 inches wide by 16 inches long. Yeah, whatever. Deep. The base of the hood is again that same 38 by 16, and then there's the tails of the. Actually, this is wrong. This is a different photo. The pattern I use actually has these being at 5 inches wide here, going down to 3 inches down there, and it has it being, instead of 18 inches long, being 32 inches long. So you end up with a nice long tail. That's substantial. And you'll lose a lot of this when you put in the hem to keep it all from unraveling and looking frayed. And so, but essentially, these two edges are what get sewn together to form the hood. And so this ends up forming the front of your hood. This is actually the top. So there's no seam on the top. The seam is actually in the back of the hood. And this will all make more sense when we start seeing all the stuff get cut. But I just wanted to kind of show you all that and kind of let you know where we're all at with that, and what numbers we're working with as we go through this. So, any questions so far?
So is that, can you start with one large piece and cut out?
Yep.
Or
Now you can sew the ties on separately. Some people do, and those are approvable. I prefer to have them be one piece, and so we'll start with this piece here and cut our shape out from here, and go from there. But it is you certainly can do the sewn ties, I believe. And I will let we have a costume judge in front with us, and who has approved a couple of these. So just a few. So, and then unless there are any other questions before we kind of get running, I'll just go ahead and start. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sure, yeah. So we do have, for this session, thanks to the con, a giveaway that we are still trying to figure out how to give away. Since this is a costume panel, it is a costume. And it's actually over here. Could you grab that real quick? Because I'm going to fall off the edge of this stage and kill myself if I go that way.
I will Vanna White it.
Yes!
Price is right.
So, very good. So, all right. Any other questions, real quick?
Are there patterns available anywhere online?
So this is the closest I found to a pattern for this hood. And the robe itself, again, is just that kind of that T shape, and depending on the person you're fitting it to, I think there are on the forums.
Yeah.
So I'll give you the whole spiel. So detachments are the way the 501st and Rebel Legions organize different kinds of costumes. For the 501st, the detachment that includes the Jawa costume is called Crate Clan, K-R-A-Y-T, Clan. The same set of costumes under Rebel Legion would be under a detachment called Wretched Hive, and that's the aliens in the good guys, or the not exactly bad guys, since Jawas kind of straddle both. You can actually be approved in both legions with the same Jawa, typically. So, depending on your judge. But as I said, so each of those detachments maintains a set of internet forums, and those are question and answer boards and things like that. And so there'll be topics and lists and things like that. And there's a lot of information about the build on there. So the typical way you would do that is and you can sign up for those forums before you're a member. And those parts of the forums are available. There are members-only parts, which you won't get to until you actually are a formal member. But all the build information tends to be out there available to the non-member public by signing up as part of that detachment. So the typical way you do that is you sign up, go make a post and say, hey, I'm looking to build a Jawa. Can you give me any pointers? And you can do some searches on the various topics. They'll be listed. Each of the characters will tend to have a fairly broad topic heading to start from, and then work your way down. And so there'll be there's one particularly active lady out there who does. Is her last name Prishaw, perhaps? Anyway, yeah. So she has a lot of information about the patterns and things like that. And so I tend to be more of a fly by the seat of my pants sort of person. And with this particular panel, I've been trying to illustrate that it doesn't take a lot of necessarily stress and all of that to get to this point. It is an easy costume to start, and it is relatively forgiving in that regard. So, all right, very good. So with our roughly square cloth here, I think it's maybe 52 inches by 53 inches. The first thing we'll want to do is try and lay out our 38 inches along the back. And I have forgotten my straight edge, so I'm gonna go grab that.
Continue Savannah if you would like.
No, that's okay. I mean, everyone enjoys the straight edge. It's practically its own character by now. It does not yet. Maybe that'll be our contest for the giveaway is name the straight edge. Whichever one has the best name. That's not how we're going to do it. Okay, awesome. Oh, Michelle has promised us some trivia, so. All right, so actually, I think what I'm going to do is, I pointed this out yesterday, but since a lot of you are new from yesterday, this is monk's cloth, and this is the cloth we use to build the Jawa robe out of. This is usually available at larger fabric stores or online. I typically get it either unbleached or white. There is a color called potting soil brown, which can be approvable on its own without having to dye. I generally get it unbleached and then dye it myself in the washing machine. But usually what it'll come to you with is the side edges, the narrow portion of your length will be sealed up like this with a bit of fabric so that it doesn't actually fray, whereas the edges along the bolt will tend to if you don't sew before you pre-shrink. But anyway, for this case, because this edge is the one I'm going to push together to make the hood, I'm going to go ahead and leave this edging here so as to just go ahead and give me a little better surface to sew into. So I'm just rotating my square of cloth so that my edge, and that is going to fall off if I don't pull some of it up here. Threads everywhere. All right. So, and if you were here yesterday, you also know my fondness for using masking tape as a marking tool. So, if you weren't here yesterday, you get the treat of figuring that out all on your own. So, all right, so we'll just go ahead and look at our 38 inches, and I'll just throw a little piece of tape there. 16 down. That again, flat and straight. And as I pointed out yesterday, one of the benefits of monk's cloth having a nice coarse weave to it is that you end up with this kind of crosshatch pattern, which if you lay the fabric out correctly, you can actually kind of use as a guideline. You can cut along those lines, and that's going to be relatively accurate from a square point of view. So, all right, there's my 38 there. All right, we'll go back, and along those lines, we'll pull our 16 inches, and I'm pretty sure this table is not 16 inches long. I'm just gonna go ahead and go out on a limb and say that's gonna be true. And I am correct. No, I was wrong, actually. Man, it's not my day. So, all right. So at 16 inches, go ahead and just throw another piece of tape just to kind of show us where we're going to be at. I'll mark it on the other side as well. We don't need to mark it any further away than where I marked my 38-inch line, however. So that's going to go ahead and define my box for the hood. So from here, I will throw a longer line of tape along that grid pattern. Make it nice and convenient to cut. And you don't have to use the tape. If you want to use some sort of marking device or what have you, please feel free to use what's comfortable for you. I just happen to have a lot of blue tape around all the time, so it's an easy commodity to work with. And again, we're about to fall, so let's gather up the slack, slide things off a little bit more, get my cut line more toward the center, get everything straightened out again. And actually, we're not cutting anything yet, just to be clear about that. So I almost made a mistake. You almost caught me again. So we do want to go ahead and mark out our 32 inches for the tail. So again, spreading things out more or less evenly. If you were to walk up here, you would notice what I've just noticed, which is that these cutting boards I'm using actually have inches marked on them. But because I've taped them together, there's some squirreliness in the numbers, so I'll go ahead and still use the straight edge. And one cut we will go ahead and make. That'll be the one on the other side of this, which is going to be the one for the 38 inches line. So again, in this case, I may just, so there we are.
Chris is working on that cut. I'll go for our first trivia question. First hand up. Go ahead and do that. We'll start off easy. Variations on what line have made it into every film in the saga?
Have a bad feeling about it.
Yes. Good job.
All right. There's a good cut line. Once again, the rotary cutter. Incredibly useful tool, but also incredibly sharp. Please be careful with it. Wasn't quite as careful as I should have been yesterday and got a little nick on my finger, but I'm okay. But it does make cutting this fabric as easy as slicing a pizza. It is an extraordinarily sharp pizza cutter. So, where you cut pizza with this, you might actually cut your pan as well. So yeah, it's actually a rotary cutter. You can find them in places like Hobby Lobby or Michael's or in the sewing sections. Joanne Fabrics, if they still existed, yeah, they still do, but they're in bankruptcy. So just any place that carries sewing notions, things like that, will have something like this. But again, like I said, you could use a standard pair of scissors and a little patience, and it's just as easy.
Does Joanne's carry the monk cloth?
Joann's has carried monk's cloth in the past. As far as I know, they still would or do. I've ordered a lot of my monk's cloth online through them because I'll find a sale and they'll be like, half off. It's like, oh yeah, cool, I'll definitely pay half off for monk's cloth. There you go. Yeah, so, and that's, that was hard. 16-inch line. All right, so now that we've got a nice edge here, we can start cutting out our ties. So again, it's a relatively simple sort of measurement. Let's go ahead and retrieve the safety rotary cutter out from under the cloth. And go ahead and measure 5 inches from the edge here. Alright. So, marker there. And then here at the end, we'll go ahead and do that at 3 inches. Just take our spiffy handy piece of tape. And actually, we don't even need the tape for this. I'm gonna go ahead and save that for a rainy day. And just, since we have the whole length of the straight edge available to us, we can just go ahead and cut that out directly. So we start right there. Running down the edge of the straight edge is actually even easier than what I did before. So that separates nice and cleanly. We've got that tail taken care of. We'll turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. And you will note that we're probably going to end up with a lot of extra cloth just from cutting out these tails, because we'll have 32 inches of mostly the middle that we're not using at the moment. As I mentioned before, the Jawa costume includes boots. Those boots are to be wrapped using strips of the same cloth that the robe and the hood are made out of. So one of the easiest things to do is to take your strap and then, again, using scissors or rotary cutter, cut out inch and a half strips, nice and long, and then glue those to your funky UGG boot, style boot, and go from there. So, all right. As such.
We'll go for another question. This was a little harder, at least for me at the end. What type of dog was the inspiration for Chewbacca, according to George Lucas? A hard one. Sure.
fair amount of extra cloth from cutting out between the ties. So this works great for your boot strips. And that has got our monk's cloth prepped real quick. We'll go ahead and cut out the black liner for the hood. Set this aside. Use the same dimensions, 38 by 16. So if I were to ever do this again, and I'm going to go ahead and regard that as highly unlikely, I would probably bring my own table. These narrow tables are not a picnic to try and work with. Not that they're terrible for what it is they intend to do, but for what I'm trying to use them for, they are certainly a challenge.
I think we can pull the outside of it up.
Yeah.
Possibly, and I don't want to reconfigure the room too much though.
Okay.
You know, that's, I mean, I appreciate the thought, and I think I had that same thought yesterday during the 501st Q&A. It's like, oh, I bet those panels come up. But then I immediately thought, but then we had to put them back down after the end of it, and, you know, trying to get out of the room to clear the next, because I hear the next guy after this one is a real hard guy to get along with. Make a similar measurement, edge to edge, without losing all of my cloth. Straight lines, damn it. All right. And come back around and measure 16 from the top. That doesn't look right. I'm gonna have to remeasure something. On the plus side, you should be getting the sense now that there's a lot of mistakes you could make in this process, and it's okay. Alright, so let's actually do this. Not that, do it here. Make my life a little easier on myself. I try anyway. Take my full length of cloth, because I seem to have a problem with the width I measured out just a second ago. Go ahead and just cut it off at the 16-inch mark. And we'll measure the 38 on the much smaller and easier to manage parcel of cloth.
So is it all right if I ask you a question?
Please do.
How long have you been doing this?
This particular sort of thing, probably about a year and a half. So I've been, and I mostly came at this trying to build cool Jawa statues that we have at our display back in the room there. And it came about because I was actually the one doing electronics in the heads, so the eyes would glow and they would scream at you when you step too close to them. Great fun. And so we had mannequins that we had come into possession of, child-sized mannequins, and we were trying to figure out what to do with them when we thought, hey, Jawas. And so the person who was going to be doing the robes originally ended up having other things, other priorities crop up, and they weren't getting them done in kind of the amount of time that I would hope for. And so we were coming up on a kind of a major event that I really wanted to kind of have the Jawas ready for. And so I said, well, let's just go ahead and take a weekend and give it a try. And so I did, and never having used a sewing machine in my life before, and you would argue that I still haven't really done so, because I've done it so not the right way. But in any event, that's kind of where that all started, and that was about a year ago. It was one of the summer cons we were trying to get ready for. But as far as the Jawa project itself, it actually is more like about 2 years, all told. And I have been involved with the 501st and the Rebel Legion in some capacity or the other for about 7, 8 years now?
Since 2018.
Since 2018 or 17?
Well, that's when I got approved on my testing, so.
Okay, so 2017, 2018, and I would do mostly handling support for her costumes, help her get dressed and not stop in the potholes and not kill herself in an escalator, things like that. And so, but you know, one of the first things you do when you take on that sort of role, kind of adjacent to the legions, is people will ask you at dinners and events and on the street, wherever you happen to be, hey, when are you going to join? When are you going to get a costume? What costume are you going to do? And eventually, you kind of internalize all of that and say, well, maybe I should do a costume. And then COVID hit, and I had a bunch of time on my hands, and so I said, well, now might be a good time to start a costume.
So you've been doing costume things for a long time?
Actually, not really a long time. It wasn't too many years before Michelle started to want to join the 501st that we even had got into it. She'd gotten into cosplaying separately, like 2015, something like that. So our first convention was in 2015. It was Fan Festival over in Irving, and she went in costume, and I did not. And I have attended far more conventions out of costume than I have in. But it turns out that I like doing things. I like tinkering. I like making props. I like, being helpful, being useful, those sorts of things. And so that's where my involvement really came in, was that Michelle was doing the costumes, and I was doing the things that make the costumes interesting, better, and all that sort of thing. So I built a fantasy staff for her plague doctor, steampunk style plague doctor, and all of that. And so yeah, it's but it has been a full 6 or 7 years for sure. And then my in having my costume started in 2021, actually 2021, I originally started off thinking I was going to do one. I ended up doing 3, starting 3 at the same time. I ended up completing 3 about within 6 months of first to last. So, it's safe to say that I enjoy it. All right, so for the next step, now that we've got the black fabric cut out about the same shape as the interior of the hood, use a spray adhesive, and I'll try to not cover the entire world in it. But essentially all we're trying to do is get it to tack to the cloth. And that's just going to make it easier to sew later on. It turns out if the inner black kind of billows a little bit, that's actually not a bad effect. So, all right. Easy way to start this in a corner. Tack down. Just kind of work it along. Press it down into the adhesive as you go. Keep everything kind of nice and pulled out and smooth. There we go. All right, so that's not too bad. Most of the stuff's gonna be hidden under the side hems or the front hem anyway, or in the seam at the back of the hood. So there we go. Now we have a definite outside and inside of our Jawa hood. right now. It will not look a whole lot different until we get the actual back seam put in. That's going to be one of the last things we're going to do, because all the rest of the sewing is actually easier without having to mess around with the shape that that seam creates for the hood. Before I accidentally sit on it, part of the straight edge. Keep an eye on my time here. So we're about 20 minutes left. So probably cover this in broad strokes, just to give you an idea of where we're going with it, since I have apparently taken a lot of time cutting things and telling you stories. So, and there's still time for the sewing machine to fail egregiously too. So let's not forget that. All right. Hopefully the camera view is there to kind of give you an idea of what I'm doing as I do it. So what you're basically going to do is you're going to create a hem along each side. So we'll start with this side, and I know that Julie leave? Good, Julie left. Awesome. No, someone who knows what they're doing with a sewing machine would probably pin this and do it right. And I'm not intentionally doing it wrong. I'm just doing it in a way that makes sense to me. My approach to the sewing machine has been more like a woodworking power tool than like a home ec piece of equipment. And so this feels more like a bandsaw to me. And so feeding material through a bandsaw, following a line, things like that. So the idea of having to manage the cloth as it hits the foot and goes under the needle is really not that big a problem for me, especially for something this rough and this kind of, let's say rustic, because that's what chefs use when they make sloppy cuts and want to serve you something anyway. Rustic, it's rustic. So, and we'll just go ahead and we've got our thread in there, and so we'll just start the stitch. And I've never felt the need to be in a great big hurry with any of this, although in the interest of time here, y'all might want me to hurry a little more, but it also gives you more of an opportunity to kind of fold the fabric at that same length as you're feeding it into the foot. And so I'm just doing that as I go down the length. I'm going to goose it just a little bit, because I feel like I can handle the extra speed. Hopefully no dead man's curves coming up. So, Michelle, do we have another trivia question?
Yeah, let's go with what species is Rita?
So I believe the question was, what species is Greedo?
Yes, good job. Yeah.
So I think what we'll probably end up doing is I'll do this one side on the hem for the ties. You would actually also hem the other opposite side of the tie as well, but we'll, in the interest of time, skip that because it's all the same stitch, and we'll move to the front hem, which is going to include the wire, and then we'll hopefully end up about right on time with sealing the seam on the back and creating the shape of the hood. So we'll see how this all ends up going. But a little more speed here, and I'll vamp a little longer with nonsense syllables and odd stories. Anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask? Or another trivia question?
Any questions? In which movie did Yoda not appear in any form? Yes.
All right, so already we are doing way better on the sewing than we did yesterday. So this feels a lot better. All right, so again, it's taken us a couple of minutes here, 2 or 3, maybe 4. Certainly not the eternity it seemed like it's been. Go ahead and seal that off a little bit with reverse stitch. Pull it out, cut off the excess. And there is our first edge along the side, so that is going to be the bottom, it's going to be the bottom of the hood and the bottom of the tie. So for the wire, for the rod, you know, the shape of and the front hem, what I will do is cut a diagonal about 3/4 of an inch in here and here. Then I'll take my wire, and so because I have some home improvement projects that used electrical wire, Romex, the three conductor wire, this is just the ground wire out of one of those. You could go to a hardware store and get a sufficiently large gauge solid core or solid wire. You could even use an insulated wire if you'd like. The insulation doesn't, you know, add or detract. I just happen to have this laying around when I was putting this together and figured I'll use this.
Would aluminum wire also work?
Aluminum wire would work. Any wire that has some sort of bend to it and will keep its shape should work fine. Yeah.
I have plenty of this thin aluminum wire and that whole spool of 150 feet.
Right, and so, you know, again, the only real thing to watch out for is how thin it is. If it's too thin, it's not going to keep shape as well. But, you know, like I said, so this is, I find this works out really well. So this particular gauge of wire. Unfortunately, I don't really have the proper tool, so I'm kind of going to jury rig this. And what I'm doing is basically putting a loop in the bottom of my wire, and that is going to prevent, hopefully, the wire from escaping the bottom of the hem, because this wire tends to get very sharp, and it will work its way through the very loose weave of the monk's cloth. And then you've got, you know, you've got something A, poking you in the neck, and B, slowly causing your hood to lose shape. And so I'll just measure that, you know, about that far, from edge to edge. Cut it off. Put the same loop in the back. Other side. There we go. Flatten that out just a little bit. Yeah, you could actually use a real pliers to do some of this operation if you wanted to, but all I have is diagonal cutters in my box, and we're going with what we have. So, and that would kind of, and there are a couple different ways to go about this. One of them certainly is to sew the hem first and then thread that through if you have enough margin in your hem. So that's what we're going to do here, because otherwise it's going to be a pain to deal with, and we don't have that kind of time. Otherwise, you know, watching me struggle could be entertaining, but you know, I mean, I feel like we've seen enough of that this week, and maybe let's try something different. So.
How much are you folding over?
So, folding over about a half an inch. As soon as I get everything fed through in a manner conducive to, so I don't know if you can see on the monitor there, about a half an inch. And I'm going to set the foot about a third of the way in on that. Since I'm using zigzag stitch, it's going to go back and forth. It should still leave me a nice wire-sized pocket to run the wire through. So I'll go ahead and set the foot, and then again we'll kind of set ourselves up for success by folding over for a little length, hitting the gas, maybe hitting the gas. There's the gas. Off we go. And as you can see, there's about 3/16 of an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch outside the edge of the foot, so there'll be plenty of margin there to run the wire through. Come on, there we go. And keep it from walking. There we go. A little too much gas. And again, a very forgiving costume because, you know, we're talking about aliens on a different planet, so. In the sand, you know. So, I mean, I'm not talking down the Jawas. I love Jawas. If I didn't, I wouldn't have one sitting on my camera. But, which by the way, thank you, Nicole. That was an awesome thing to receive this morning. So just continue feeding our way through. A little more gas, keeping everything folded under nicely. So we've got a good margin going. And as we get the edge here, get everything so it's going to want to fold over properly. Keep that all nice and put together. And away we go. All right, Michelle, do we have any more trivia?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go for a tiebreaker question between the two of you down there. So get ready, whichever hand goes up first. Which actor is the only one who's ever appeared in every single Star Wars movie? That is it. We're gonna go ahead and give the winner.
All right, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Very adamant about that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that is the front hem, and I will hold this up here in a second to kind of show you what we ended up with. So, front hem. Go ahead and grab our piece of wire. Thread that through really quick. A slight snag, but I think that's more to do with the wire than the cloth itself. So anyway, if this takes more than about another second to resolve, we'll go ahead and go after the back seam rather than mess around too strenuously with this. Oh, there we go. Powered our way through. All right, and yeah, so I think I left a burr on that wire, so that's what's causing it to catch. So we'll go ahead and abandon that briefly in the interest of showing you something new and interesting as opposed to something old and not all that interesting. That's the next panel, right? Exactly. Everything new is old again. So, all right, and so I will go ahead and actually account for the seam as I put this together. The key here is to fold it so that the outsides are together, so that you're ending up with the seam that is going to be on the inside. Again, like this. And if you manage all the things you left hanging because you didn't have quite enough time to realize the vision. Again, feed under the foot, and right on the inside of your black fabric would be great. Right on through. Nice and straight. All right, are there any other questions from the audience since we've resolved the giveaway issue? Yes, sir.
Is this recorded and available for public access?
So it is being recorded. Yeah, that is true. And I'm not sure so it's being recorded by both the convention and by our organization. It is my intent, hopefully if we end up with something usable, to make this available after the fact. I don't know what the convention plans to do with their footage. So on the website. So yeah, so this should be available as well as the other two sessions from earlier. So just in case you felt like you missed out on a lot more of this comedy gold, should be available.
I learned better from videos.
Understood. So, all right, so having thrown that seam in there, we simply take our hood, turn it inside out, and get that nice little point. And so we don't stab ourselves in the eye with our half-fed wire. All right, there we go. So I think that puts us just before time, so that'll give us a little time to reset between this and the next panel. The next panel will be prop weathering, so if you're interested in that. I will still be up here, so if you're not interested in that, now's your chance to get out of here. Nothing less than expected, ladies. So,
Ironically, we actually do have to leave, but.
no, but not for that reason. Gotcha.
Not for
No,
that reason.
I understand.
Give about 15 minutes, I'll be back.
All right. Any final questions before I switch gears and turn into prop weathering? Sure. Right. I think. Right. So I think this one, which was kind of entry level one, was about 200.
It was under, yeah, it was,
Something under 200. Not a whole lot under necessarily, but somewhere in that range.
yeah, right around 200.
This particular model is a Singer Confidence 7353, I believe. I don't think they make this particular model anymore because this is several years old, but they have a very similar model, I'm sure, on the market today. I mean, if you go to a well, and again, I mean, the differences are mostly going to be in how heavy duty fabric you can put through it, how reliable it's expected to be, things like that. So, again, I tend to be, if I'm buying a tool, I want to buy something quality, unless I'm only using it once. If I'm using it once, I go to Harbor Freight and I get whatever it is they're selling, and it'll work once, maybe twice, and then I'm good. Yeah.
I think it was Adam Savage who said that when starting a new project, buy the cheapest tools possible, and when whatever breaks, buy the most expensive one you can find.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, is that you don't necessarily want to load up on the expensive tools before you really have kind of got a feel for how they operate. You're going to make mistakes. I mean, unless you're extraordinary, you're going to make mistakes. And maybe you are extraordinary, and I'm not gonna say you're not. But yeah, so it's definitely going to be a learning process, and so it makes sense to reduce your investment while you're learning. If you have access to a friend who has something like that and kind of practice a little bit, get a feel for what it's like, you might decide you like theirs well enough to buy the same one they have. So it's kind of that's how I would approach it. Honestly, full disclosure, we had bought this because Michelle was going to sew her own Jawa years ago, and then I'm the cause on this. I went ahead and commissioned a Jawa costume for her from a vendor for Christmas one year, and removed the need for her to sew her own Jawa costume. So we had a sewing machine and nothing to sew until I decided I needed to produce 4 Jawa costumes in a hurry for a bunch of statues. So, so all right, well,
With a sewing machine, it also depends on how many belts you have.
sure.
If you want one that you do all the fancy stitches and all those things, it's gonna cost you more. If you want something that's pretty simple, it's gonna cost you a little less.
I mean, this particular model has like 30 stitches available. I think I've used 4 of them. And I think that's mostly out of curiosity. I think I could have gotten by with 2. But so the straight stitch, zigzag stitch, especially the zigzag stitch for the Jawa, is a nice thing. It tends to lock those threads together fairly nicely. Keep it from fraying where you don't want it to fray. So, other questions?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Continue on with it, because I know as someone who does leather work, I know leather stitching machines are thousands.
Well, and that's going to be that's going to be mostly because of the amount of force you need to be able to put that needle through the material with. With a sewing machine, you're usually dealing with fabric, woven fabric, knit fabric, things like that. And so it's a little less pressure required. Turns out that animal skin has a purpose, and that's to keep the animal's insides inside. So it tends to be a little durable. So, right.
Like an $89 leather sewing machine that's like hand crank. Just the most dangerous looking thing you've ever seen. And it's like, it works.
I'm gonna have to go look afterward and see where I can find that, because that sounds like it's right up my alley. All right. Anything else? If not, I'll let you go. If you're staying for the next one, you're welcome to do so. If not, thank you for coming here, and hope you enjoy the rest of the con.